welcome everyone. My name is Janet. I'm working through the King James's Bible. Today I'm in the book of Numbers and working through the final 5 chapters. So we're working through chapter 32 to 36 today. Now, if you watched the video yesterday or if you read chapter 31, you will know that the Israelites have won battle now over the Midianites. So they'd won, they killed all the men and all the young boys, and they've kept some of the women who were not, who hadn't slept with the Israelites. So we're at this point where they've got a bigger tribe now, and they've also got more livestock and more silver and gold from their war. So in chapter 32 we begin with the Gadites, which is the tribe of Gad, and also the Reubenites, which is the tribe of Reuben, and both these tribes have quite a large livestock, and they're looking for some ideal land, which they find in the land of Gilead and Jezer. So they go to Moses and Eleazar and they ask, can we have this land? Because it looks perfect for our livestock. We don't want to go over to Jordan. We want to just stay here. Can we have it? And Moses says to them, look, I don't think that's a good idea, because we are meant to wage a war as God has commanded over in Canaan to get that land. That is the promised land. If you guys stay here, residing in this land, then you're going to divide the team. And we've already had one rebellion. Now, if you remember, when they sent spies over to see what was going on in the land of Canaan, with the 12 tribe leaders, they all went to spy on it. They came back. 10 of them were against going to war with them because they thought they were outnumbered. They thought they were stronger than them. But the 2 that were faithful to God, which was Caleb and Joshua, those 2 were so faithfully strong, thought we can do it. And because there was that divide, remember, it broke up the camp itself. There was a rebellion, and God said, that's it. You guys are not going now until the promised land for 40 years. Because he wanted to wipe out that older generation's thinking. So he's now brought up this newer generation, and it looks to Moses like this could be starting all up again. So on thinking about this, Reuben and Gad tribes decide, look, we're going to go to war. That's fine. We will go to war with you as long as we inherit this land. That's kind of what they want for going to war with the whole team, because they are a team, the Israelites together. So if they're in it together, they've got to stay together and all work together to win. So they decide to do that, and the other half tribe of Manasseh, they join in this inheritance as well, because they obviously see that they'd like some of the lands. So Moses agrees, and he says, okay, we can do this. You can have that land as long as you go to war with us. Then when we win, you'll inherit that land. So they are granted the kingdom of Sihon, king of the Amorites, and the kingdom of Og, which was previously ruled by King Bashan. So that's what they get, and that closes chapter 32. Now, chapter 23 is basically a journal of the journey that they have been on, the Israelites, from Egypt to where they are now under the leadership of Aaron and Moses. So I'm going to give you a quick visual just to show you. And if you look at this map, you'll see on here the journey that they'd taken. So those dotted lines, they start up there in Egypt, and you can see they come down, round, up and around, remember, right up the top and across. Check out the link under this video for the specific details, because I don't want to go through each land part, but I'm just going to cover some of the key points that are given in this chapter. That they start at Ramesses. You can see there, they're going down. Then from there you can see they've crossed the ocean partly, going down to Mara, Alim, down the bottom there, the wilderness of Atham they've gone. Again, we cover, you can see they're coming down from the wilderness, Redimian, I can't pronounce these names, Mount Sinai, do you see there where they were? Remember Mount Sinai? Then they go all the way up, and look at the division that they've gone up and down and around. That is the roundabout. They go Kadesh Barnea, they go right round that, the wilderness of Zen, round there. Then up towards Edom, remember, and Moab. And now kind of we're here at this final part, the River Jordan. Do you see there at the top? That is kind of where we are. And then they will cross over Jordan there, over to Jericho, Jerusalem, and into Canaan, the promised land. So they're getting close. They're getting close to that land. Now it was at this point Mount Hor If you remember, that's where Aaron went up to that mountain. That's where he passed away. And he was 123 when he passed away on that mountain. That's when Moses came back down and, announced to the Israelites that he'd passed, and they mourned. And God also commands in this chapter that the Israelites, when they get to Canaan, they have to get rid of all the inhabitants in the land. They must get rid of them all and destroy all of their cast idols and any engraved ornaments, anything that they're, praying to, like as a false god, to remove. And then once they get to Canaan, they are to divide the land up equally, as he'd said about the inheritance. To those with the larger tribes would get more larger land, and those with the smaller tribes would get more of a smaller proportion of the land. Now God warns the Israelites too here that if they don't remove all the inhabitants, then those inhabitants would become a thorn in their side. They'd cause them big problems in life. Not only that, God's wrath would be upon them too, and he would cause just as much wrath on them that he was going to cause to those who are already residing in the land. So that's a big warning, and that closes this chapter. So now in chapter 34, we're covering the borders, which will line out where the promised land is, which land that the Israelites own, which is their inheritance. So I'm going to show you again a visual of that, so you can see that's where those lines are. Those are the borders of the land that the Israelites own. So the southern border begins at the eastern region from the south of the Dead Sea, and it finishes at the Mediterranean Sea. The northern border runs from the Mediterranean Sea, Mount Hor, then onto Leo Hamath. The western border will be on the Mediterranean Sea and will border on the west. And then the eastern border includes the slopes of the Galilee Sea. It runs down the Jordan and finishes at the Dead Sea. So that's just a brief overview of what section of the land that the Israelites will inherit. And Moses explains in this chapter that this land that has been bordered off will be divided between 9.5 of the tribes, because a percentage of that land's already been given, remember, to the Reubenites and the Gadites and half of the Manasseh tribe, because they wanted that land for their livestock. So they'd already inherited their land. And God told Moses that it was Elijah and Joseph's responsibility to allocate the land between these 9.5 tribes. Moses also was to appoint a leader from each tribe to help out. So that closes chapter 34. Now we move into our next chapter, which is chapter 35. This is where Moses is still in Moab, and God is talking to him, telling him that the Israelites must give some of their inherited land to the Levites. So he wants them to give them enough land for their animals and some towns for them to reside in. And God specifically sets out how big these areas should be. He also wants them to give the Levites places of refuge. So he wants them to give them 6 towns, 3 on each side of the Jordan River, 1 north, central and south. So they're easily accessible, because these places of refuge are for those who had accidentally killed someone and would live while standing trial. So that's why these are to be set up. Those innocent of murder as well, who reside in the refuge, were then basically, that was where they lived from there on, because obviously they would have maybe the avenger of blood who wants to see them dead, so they would stay there permanently, and they could only be released really once the high priest died. That's what it said. So they were sort of captive really once that had happened in the refuge. That was where they had to live, or they could move once the high priest died. And it depends, I guess, on how old that priest is when you end up in there yourself. Plus the Levites would get 42 towns for themselves, so that would give the Levites 48 towns in total. Now God also says the tribes with the bigger allocation of land are to obviously give more towns away to the Levites as those with a smaller portion of land. So that seems fair to me. Then next we move on to murder laws and penalties. So a deliberate murder equals death. Whoever has deliberately killed somebody is immediately sentenced to death. Now they have to, if somebody is sort of like standing trial for murder, they have to have 2 witnesses, not just 1, 2. And if someone was guilty of murder, they could not buy their way out. Death was the charge. That is it. If they are guilty, they die, basically. That's it. And God also says, do not pollute the land. So any murder not brought forth to justice meant that it was defiling the land. And so that had to be brought forth so that God could then atone for it and cleanse the land. Because obviously God is residing with the Israelites in their towns and cities. He is amongst them. So it has to be clean, it has to be pure, and that is what he is stating here as we close this chapter. And now we move on to chapter 36. And this goes into more detail about the daughters who we were talking about yesterday. The 5 daughters who came to Moses and Eleazar and said about, our father has died, he's left no sons, how are we going to inherit the land? Can we inherit it ourselves? And God said yes. So in this chapter, the Gilead tribe and tribes that had descended from Joseph, along with other tribe leaders, came to Moses with concern about the Zelophehad daughters. They were concerned that what if these daughters married somebody outside of their tribe? Then what? Because they saw it as their inheritance would not remain as part of their ancestral inheritance. So God clears this up beautifully and says the daughters must marry within their tribes. They're not allowed to marry outside of their tribe. So that is what they do. They stick with his commands and they marry their cousins. So that law is now set. And so if any woman married outside of her tribe, then she would lose that land. It would no longer become her inheritance. And so we close this chapter with Moses being in Moab still, not quite at that promised land yet, and been given all of these commands from God. And we've covered quite a lot in these 5 chapters. So that concludes our 5 chapters within the book of Numbers and concludes this book. So we've covered the Gadianites and the Reubenites who are wanting a specific section of land for their herds. And so they had a negotiation really with Moses and God saying, can we inherit this? And yeah, of course, as long as you are part of the whole tribe, and go to war. Then we have the order of how they moved through Egypt and are now at Moab. So that's all been documented. And the boundaries have been set, so they know exactly where they are to live, which part of the promised land is theirs. The Levites now know what land they will inherit and how that's all going to take shape. And the penalties for murder, how that is all to be panned out. And then finally, any woman heirs, they are to marry within their tribe, and if they don't, then they lose the land that they inherited. So it's all been really covered. That's what this book has been all about, really. Numbering the people, putting them into their allocated places, divvying up the land, who's going to get what, how are they going to move. He's also seen how there's been a rebellion, and he's used that time, he's put them in the wilderness to wipe out their older tribe to get the newer generation moving forward so that they will bring forth the true righteous way of living that God wants so he can reside amongst them in this land and finally have the right people there. He's saying clear out the people who are there already because they've not done things right, and if they don't, then they will be then the bane of their lives. It caused them devastation along with God. So it's God's got this cycle. He's trying to get the people to connect with him. And we also see Moses now letting go of his role, because once they move into the promised land, he will no longer be with them. So he is sort of passing over that role to Joshua, and we have Eliza as the high priest. Aaron is now gone. So there's been a lot of change that has gone on through the book of Numbers. It's been very orderly, setting things out, moving people into the right places, into their tribes. We've got the 12 tribes around them. And now we are ready to move into the next book within the King James's Bible. So what a detailed book Numbers is. We've got all the information there now, and we're all ready to move into that promised land. So thank you for being here, and I'll be back tomorrow moving into the next book within the King James's Bible. Hope to see you all then. Bye.